I would like to welcome Nalita Gajadhar from Barbados. Dear colleagues, you might be aware that Barbados is a small island country in Caribbean Sea. It is it has a total area of 432 square kilometer. Capital city is Bridgetown, and total population as per the Wikipedia is 287,025 in 2019, and it's quite far from Nepal. Total distance, distance is aeronautical distance is 13,952 kilometers from Kathmandu to Barbados. I would like to introduce her. Nalita Gajadhar from Barbados will be sharing her experience and knowledge with us on retired life issues and perspectives. She has been associated as in the Bureau of Gender Affairs in the Ministry of Youth, Family and Sport as a program officer. She is in that position from 2004. She has been serving in different capacities from 1983. She has long working experience, professional experience. She has must be very useful for us, very knowledgeable on this issue. She has a postgraduate diploma degree in gender and development from the University of West Indies. Besides, she has completed various professional courses from different prestigious educational institutions, including the University of East Anglia. She has been providing her professional service to different organizations, including UNIFEM, UNDP, CARICOM, and Inter-American Development, and many others. So I would like to kindly request Nalita to make her presentation. And in this presentation, in today's session, we will have 1.5 hours. She will make her presentation from 35 to 40 minutes. Then we will have time for question, answers, comments, and to know about our experience and our feelings. So now, floor is yours, Nalita.
Good. I'm gonna say good morning from Barbados, but I know it's good evening where you are.
Yes.
So good evening to you, and I want to thank you for having me. It was I feel it's an honor to speak to such a wide array of people from so many different parts of the world. As you were saying, and I thank you for the introduction. Barbados is in fact a very small country. We are in the Caribbean Sea, and you broke it down in kilometers. For me, we talk about miles, 166 square miles, which is really very, very, very small, a very small country. We have a population around 280,000 people. And with that population, we like to say that we have a life expectancy of 78 for women, 78 years for women, and 76 years for men. However, when you examine the life expectancy from a gender perspective, you see that really, in fact, even though women have a longer life expectancy, because of the level of their health, having contracted or developed non-communicable diseases, and by these diseases, I'm talking about hypertension, I'm talking about diabetes, I'm talking about heart problems and heart disease and so on, because they have a shorter, they might have a longer life expectancy, but they have a long period where they are dealing with their own personal ailments, and as opposed to men who tend not to have that length of time. The fortunate thing, however, is that when women do become ill, and we talk about this in gender, that they have a greater support services or backup family support and so on than do men, but we can talk about that later. In terms of education, we like to say education in Barbados is at the very highest level. We say 98%. Of course, that's a high figure, and we've been looking at it because we've had a lot of changes in terms of education and so on, but we still use the figure of 98%. We have universal access to education for all boys and girls, and our universal access goes to up to the first degree at the university. And there is a University of the West Indies that covers 3 countries in the region: Trinidad, Barbados, and Jamaica. And so for students from any of the countries within CARICOM or within the Caribbean can go to these countries based on the support that they get from their governments. So there's universal access. We've had adult suffrage in Barbados from 1953, which meant that men and women, both women, could vote. And in actual fact, the very first year that we had adult suffrage, a woman was elected to the Parliament of Barbados. Although it took a number of years before we got another one, almost 23 years before you got another woman elected, but we can say that we've had women participation in elective government for a long time. Because even before there was, we had independence and we had the parliament, the way it is, you had a kind of a local government where a large number of women operated on the councils across the parishes and so on. In terms of our politics or our structure, the structure of our government, we base our government on the Westminster system. And as I was stating earlier, the result, having been a country that was colonized by the British, we adopted a lot of systems that were there. So even although we became independent, we still basically use a number of these systems. And the Westminster parliamentary system is one that we use, where you have the Queen as the head of state, you have elected an elected member of parliament, and the prime minister of that part of the country is selected from the selected members of government, the selected members of parliament, who then will inform the governor general, who represents the Queen, that this person has the highest support in the country and that person should become the prime minister of the country. So it is a constituency election. We have 30 constituencies right now, and those 30 constituencies having elected a representative, that representative will then, those representative results will then come together and decide who will become the prime minister. So we don't vote for a prime minister, we don't vote for a president, we don't have a president, we have a prime minister. And then the prime minister, you have a bicameral cabinet system, bicameral, where you have the House Assembly, which is made up of the elected members, and you have a Senate that is made up of people who are selected by the prime minister and selected by the members of the leader of the opposition. They become the Senate. And how the system works is that you have the prime minister will then select a cabinet, which is like an executive committee that manages the country. Necessarily a rubber stamp. If the Senate does not necessarily agree, then the bill is not passed, and they would have to go back to Parliament and bring a new bill or something like that. We have a very strong judiciary, which is independent from the political directorate. They have a separate commission who appoints the Chief Justice and the justices and so on. And we have been very fortunate because we have a university in the West Indies that does law. We have a very high percentage of lawyers in Barbados. I don't have the number, but I do know that every year we bring out about 20 or 30 lawyers, which is a lot for us in the region in Barbados. And women might like to know that the majority of them tend to be women who are going into law these days. I think that's that in terms of the statistics. That is it. We've been designated a high income country, but our per capita income is just like 2,500 US dollars, which is relatively slow. No, it would be 1,500 US dollars because it's 2,000 Barbados, 2,005 Barbados dollars. So because we have a 1-to-2 ratio, two Barbados dollars is equivalent to 1 US dollar. So we have that ratio in terms of the dollars and so on. And so we're deemed to be a high developed country. But in actual fact, that covers the challenges that the country faces, because when you are listed as a highly developed country, then you don't have access to a number of resources that's provided at the international financial community. And so we're not able to get access to a number of grants. We're not able to get access in some instances to cheaper loans because of our status. And what our new Prime Minister, who I think I said is female, has been speaking about, and she's been really been accepted in the international community on the premise that you can't judge a country on its per capita income and rate it in that way, and then restrict it from having access to certain resources because of how you judge, how you evaluate. And being in the Caribbean, and where we have hurricane season, right now we're in a hurricane season. We have a hurricane season every year from July, I think it's July to November. And your economy could be so devastated in one season, as we saw last year in the Bahamas, and we saw the year before in Antigua, where it took the country back maybe 20, 30 years. You can't really, you need then to put in a separate fund that deals with calamities and accept that small island states for their own survival have different challenges and different areas of responsibilities and different needs. And so that she's been pushing very hard for the international community to understand that. So we are leading in small island states in terms of the discussion on small island states across the world, because, and we're leading as well on climate change in the region and across the world, because we will, as a small island state in the region, in Barbados, in the Caribbean, we'll be very vulnerable, even if there's just a small percentage of growth in terms of the water, what I'm trying to remember the term, but you can ask me later and it'll probably come back to me. Yeah, because you're talking about islands sinking because of the water rising. So because of how we are, and because we are a flat country, that's a major concern for us in Barbados. So that is it. If you wanted to ask me anything else about Barbados, I'll try and ask. I can tell that we're a beautiful country. We have sun most days, except when it rains. We are a tourist destination. We are highly rated in the tourist industry, and around the world, we are regarded as one of the highest tourist destinations. And we have people mainly coming from the United Kingdom and USA, and Canada as our neighbors in the north. Recently we've been expanding our doors and trying to invite people from China have been coming in. China's been in looking at us and coming in a lot. So we're getting visitors from them as well. And unfortunately or fortunately, tourism is our main income earner for government. But that makes us even more vulnerable because in the instance like where we just had COVID, where you've had to close down, the world was closed down. And the country, although we weren't closed, we didn't shut our ports, you still had a reduction in tourists coming to the country. We recognize what it has done to our economy. And so that you would have a high level of unemployment. I think we're looking at 30% unemployment right now. We're in a country where our unemployment was down to like 8 or 9%. So that just with COVID, you went then from a 30, that's 10% to a 30% or higher unemployment because of COVID, because of how the economy was structured. And it had that dependency on tourism. But it is a beautiful country, and we have the sea and the sand, and you have the caves that you could visit. You know, it's really a nice place that you could come and have. And this is my tourism pitch for you, that you could come and spend a week and have a really, really good time in Barbados. All right. But what I wanted to, my main thing in talking to you this morning or this evening had to do with the gender. And I've been working in the area of gender development for some time. But I still think that for a lot of people still don't understand when you talk about gender, what you mean. And I think that sometimes it's a deliberate attempt not to understand what gender means because we've been talking about it for so many years. All we're saying when we're talking about gender and development is for us to understand that there are differences between men and women, that there are structural differences between men and women, and that those differences really does not need to you can accept the differences without creating a system where that there is people that are disenfranchised, that there are people who are without access to resources and so on. So let's talk about some of the differences. Men will do things different to men, to women. Women will do things that are different to men. That's acceptable. But when you're talking about gender, we're saying, let us look at what those differences are. Let us see how those differences affect how we behave. Let's see how those differences affect how we live. And if we are planning as a government, if we're planning as a people, then we need to take into consideration what those differences are so that when we are developing our country, we're trying to add things to our country, we're trying to improve the lives of people of our country, that we can't say one shoe fits all. It does not. It does not. So you then will have to shop around and say, okay, so we need a size 5, we need a size 6, you need a size 7, you need a size 8. And if you don't have a size 8 in that style, what do you do with that shoe to make a size 8 fit? Maybe you might need to cut the top off, or you might need to turn it into a sandal so that you're able still at the same time to meet the purpose of the person who is wearing the shoe. So if you think in terms of national policy, and that's what gender and development tries to do to influence national policy, we're saying if you understand the real life, the practices of men and women, and the experiences of men and women, and the expectations of men and women, that you need to develop policy that takes these things into consideration. So then you start to look then at the rules. We have a society that still maintains, even although we have women working and the women want to work and women are happy to work and women are happy to contribute to the society, we have a situation where we still define women in specific categories. and we define men in specific categories, and we're still holding them to the old notion of a gender role, a woman's role. A woman's role is this, and a man's role is the other. But when it comes to sharing the economic responsibility of the family, we expect that the woman's income should contribute to the livelihood of the family. But we still expect that the woman would be responsible largely to maintaining that role of the nurturer, the provider of care, the person who manages the home. And then all of these things then contribute to the woman not being able to succeed in her work, in her career choice, because she now has to be the one who takes the children to the doctor. She has the one who has to stay home and look after the grandmother. She has to be the one who stays and look after the sick husband or the sick brother or something like that. So you have a situation where you, in one instance, you say you accept that women can participate in the economic sphere of the country by working and earning an income. But on the other side, you're not willing to take the decisions that will make it possible for men to accept that they too can make a change in the private sphere, where they are able to perform different roles or change roles or assist in the care of the home, and so on. So these are things that when we're talking about that, we try to get people to understand. We get people to understand the whole challenges of being a young woman, and the vulnerability of being a young woman, because you start to look at gender in the context of crime, and you say, okay, well, look, what's happening to the young woman? The young woman, she might very well be the person who is subject to rape or violence or family violence, depending on your culture. Yeah. What does that do to your community? What does that do to your society? Because you have a society that's made up of men and women, but you're destroying half, or you're reducing half because of your discriminatory practices, and you're not allowing them to contribute at the fullest level within their country, so that you can have a development at a level that encompasses everybody. Dr. Union Baratold, she is the head of the University of West Indies, Barbados, Cave Hill. And she has a theory of gender, and she calls it the gender system. And she proposes that when we start to look at gender, we see gender in two different areas: the material and the idealistic. The material we are easy with. The material, we can institute policies that will improve women's lives. We can institute policies that will improve women's access to education. We can institute women's policies that will look after maternal care, and so on. And we're very good at doing these things because a lot of times we are guided by the international conventions that our countries have signed on to. And we want to be seen as a modern country. So we sign on to them and we say, yes, we are all about equal rights for citizens. And we're going to do this, and we're going to ensure that our women have this, or the women have that, or women have the other. Yeah. But idealistically, how do we see these people that we call women? Because generations and generations and generations have said to us, these are how these people should be. And it's very difficult. Even I, who have been doing this work, sometimes fall into the trap where I myself question, but she's just been beaten by a man. What did she do? I do that sometimes, which is shocking, because no one does anything to warrant being abused by their partner or being beaten by their partner. No one deserves that. Yeah. So you have the idealistic where you say, oh yeah, I'm gonna send my daughter to university because I want her to become a doctor. But then we look outside and we look at other people's daughters who are trying to be doctors, and we're saying, but why aren't they in the homes? Why are they not looking after their children? Because idealistically, we have a difficulty accepting this whole issue of equality based on a person's human right. And that's what gender talks about a lot. We're talking about a human right to access in a community, in our country, of people with equal access to resources, equal access to status, equal access to power, equal access to whatever the state or the community provides. And that is what gender really means. It's not to pull men down. Most of us who work in the area, I'm not saying that you don't have various styles of gender and feminist movement that wanted to destroy men. But the most people who have spent the time being educated and understanding the challenges that both men and women face realize that gender is a jail for both men and women. And if you look at the highest level of I'm not sure what it's like in your country, but certainly in the Western world, you're seeing a higher level of suicides are committed by men because a large extent men, because they too are boxed into a role that they can't always fulfill. They too are forced to perform a function that sometimes is beyond them, to be the man, to be the man, to be the leader, to be the head. And what does that mean for them? And when they can't fulfill it because of circumstances that's beyond their control, what do they do? How they then become a man? And these are the challenges that gender, the discussion on gender helps us to understand, helps us to develop, and help us to work about. And that's why it's so important for us, especially, and I'm so glad that there's so many men here to understand that it is not a challenge of masculinity at all. It's not to impose femininity on masculinity, but it's just simply to say, as human beings, we all have a right to equal access, to be treated fairly, to be treated with love, to be treated with consideration, and to be treated fairly within the law. Because it is in the law that fails us a lot of time, because we have the law sometimes based on tradition, based on the fact that the legislators are lazy and they don't want to make the changes that's required because they are political, because they're afraid that it's going to have some political impact or something like that. So that's what gender is. That's what gender means. But then when you take into gender now, you take that and you start now to look at people's lives differently. You then recognize that gender impacts every aspect of our lives. So what does a 62, taking off a year, what does a 62-year-old woman like me do when I'm thinking about retirement? She takes a whole year to think about it because it's a fearful place to be in, where you have been independent, you've been working for your salary, you're working for a salary that can maintain you and assist your family, to now to a situation where you are working with a reduced income. And you're not sure, in actual fact, how it is going to be, how you're going to be able to function. It is terrifying. It's totally terrifying because as a society, we live, and it's so interesting because most of our religions talk to us about looking after widows, our responsibility for looking after the widows and the children. But a lot of times we're not widows, we're just poor women who also need some help, who also need for the state to recognize that now our lives have changed. And because our lives have changed, we now need to look at life differently. How do we cope mentally with the fact that we're not going out to work every day? That's a big task because you're accustomed working. And just like a man, he's going to have the same challenges a man might have his golf, he may have his writing, he might have his whatever. But a woman who has been conditioned most of her life to be in the home What does she have in terms of an avenue to get out? So what? They then become recluse. They stay in their homes and they do absolutely nothing but care for their grands and hope that their grands love them. But when the grands don't love them and when they are seen as useless people within a community and they just sit there and wait to die, are we giving them their human right to a life, a long life, based on their own capacity to live? Or are we robbing them of an opportunity that they should have if we had looked at a different way of planning for the elderly, a different way of planning for people's lives, recognizing that what men do and what women do. And just so that you don't think I'm only talking about women, let's look at what happens with men. Yeah? You have men who might live their lives in a real strong way, in groups, and where they're supported and loved by the people in their group, supposedly. But when they become ill, where is their support system? When they become ill, who checks in with them? They haven't seen them for a year. They haven't seen them for 6 months. Man, he used to come and join this meeting every Monday. But I haven't seen him for a couple of Mondays. But who checks in? And who wonders what he's doing? Because we're not taught. We're not taught to just say, we're not taught to say that they to believe that a man needs help. So we leave him alone. And he's not taught to ask for help. So he doesn't ask for help. And so they men go into retirement, and next thing you know, somebody says, well, this chap has died. Oh, how did he die? How did he die? We just didn't see them and look, he did. Yeah. So these are things that we need to talk about. We need to look at the family structure. Thank you for the question. We need to look at the family structure. Within the family structure, we tend to have, I would like to say that our families are strong. We have most of our households are single parent. That means that they're headed by women, and they look up in general. I think about 37. No, I think it's about 43% of our households are headed by single women. These are women in most instances who choose not to be married, because previously being married meant that you had certain rights taken from you. Your husband had to sign for this, or your husband had to give you permission to do that or to do the other. So a lot of women in the Caribbean have had a long history of single parenting. You have households. You have households that are headed by two families, where two women or might come together, two sisters might come together and raise their children together. You might have a family that is structured with 3 generations in it, because that's the only way to deal with the economic situation, because child can't find home. Child can't afford home because of the cost of living. And so the mother has the child, and the child has children, and you have 3 generations in a house. And unfortunately, that's an instance where there is the highest level of poverty, because you have intergenerational poverty in that structure. You have, I must say though, that in recent years, because of the work that we have been doing in gender in Barbados, that there's a large number of men, and I say this with a smile, who are taking on their family responsibility in a very, very positive way. Because now you're seeing men who are risking their own jobs, like taking days off to look after their sick children, or to look after their mother, or just to simply care. You know, you see men who are saying, look, I can cook better than men, and then my wife, and I'm enjoying cooking, and they're cooking, and they're going home, and they're cooking, and they preparing meals for their families, and it's not threatening their masculinity, because their masculinity has nothing to do with the pot and the pan. So you have that type of change that is occurring in the country, which is awesome. Unfortunately, I will die before we reach the full level that I would like to reach at. But you see it growing, you see it happening. And it comes with general education that masculinity and femininity is not defined by a role. And that is how they have conditioned us all these years, zillions of years, to say because of our body function, as women who produce children and who will nurse children, that we have a different role function beyond raising the child. I'm saying that we love children. We don't want to stop having children. That's our joy. That's our pleasure. But we're not limited to that. We have brains as well. And we can think and we can analyze. So let us have our children. And when we stop nursing them, Dad, you take them up. You help to teach them as well. So that we have a chance. We all have a chance to live their optimum lives. And that's what we talk about when we're talking about gender. But let me get back to a little bit about retiring. My daughter asked me, when I told her I was going to retire, she said she was very excited because they've been telling me to do this for some time. Come on, Mommy, you need to stop this. You've been doing this for too long, Mommy. You're tired. You're not well. You're not tired. You're tired. And I was fearful. I was honestly so very fearful about it. And then just last week, because I've only just applied. That's last week. I came into work and I heard that the lady who looked after the office, the cleaner in the office, that she had died. She had just applied for her retirement, but she died before she got it. She was going to the 67 years. She was 66 and a half. She died a week after her birthday, her 67th birthday. I am not sure her status of benefit, if that goes on to her family or not. I don't know. But that was a rude awakening for me. Because I said, self, what am I doing? Why am I still doing this? Why do I still need to do this? And when do I stop? And it was clear, I'm one of these people who react, so I said, yes, I'm gonna start. And I got up and I wrote the letter to my HR human resource officer. And I said, look, I'm applying for retirement, and I sat down and I worked it out. And I still have the sticker. I sat down and I worked it out, and I worked it out for March 30th, 2021. I stuck it up so that I can see it every day. That was my end. But then I realized that I had made an error in my dates. So I actually am going off in the 2nd of February, the 10th of February, 2021. So I've got some more time. But it had my daughter then after, but even after she was praising and she was happy for me, the other day she said to me, we were driving home, and she said, but Mommy, what are you going to do? I said, how you mean, what are you going to do? She said, but Mommy, you know that you can't function. You can't function well at home without something to do. You always need to be doing something for somebody or something. You always need to do that. And I said, well, to be quite honest, I really was thinking about what I was going to do, because to plan a time where you didn't have anything to do was just as fearful as having a continuing a job where you had so much to do that you were overwhelmed and you were too tired to do it. So I had to convince her that I would. And that's something that I want, as I come to the end of the presentation, that I want you to understand about retiring, whether you're a man or a woman, is understanding, learning about yourself, learning about what you have done through all your life, and making plans to ensure that you still continue a healthy retirement, one where you are stimulated in your mind, you're stimulated by your thoughts, and your energies are not extracted at such a level where you're left exhausted. I wish all of you a happy retirement, because I pray to God that I have a good and healthy one. With my grands, I have 3 grands. One is 9 months old, one is 4 years old, and the other is 13 years old. And nothing gives me pleasure than working and playing and teaching and watching how these children grow, how they live. And I think that that's a good place to be happy. And I think that that's what retirement should be, to lead you a place where you're not tired, but that you're happy. Thank you for listening. If there are any specific questions, I would love to answer. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Nalita. And there are some questions in chat box you can see. Can you see that?
Okay. Okay. The first question talks about gender equality and about income and so on, and participation. We're a country that we have been practicing or working towards gender equality for a number of years. We have a very high rate for gender equality because of our involvement with the international community and following the conventions as far as possible, and that's been a very good guide for us. So I would say that our gender, we have. I don't have the rate with us, but I could send you that. I could send you that if you if you're interested. The main income. We have a large percentage of people who are, I think, about 30% of the working population that's employed by government. And within that structure, more men and women are employed, and they're employed. They get access to equal pay for equal work, but not of equal value, and that's something that we're stressing on. Because what we have found, even though we say that people are paid equally, yes, they're paid equally for the job that they do. But when you start to look at jobs that have traditionally been held by women, you find that they attract a lower pay. For instance, teachers and nurses. When you look at the value of the teachers, the value of the nurses to our economy, COVID has exposed it, hasn't it? Yeah, you realize that these people have a tremendous value, have a tremendous value to the life of the country, but yet their pay structure tends to be rather low. And if you compare that, and we did an analysis sometime last year where we looked at we broke down the job components of the gardener, and we broke down the job components of the maid. And we found that when you started to look at the specific components of the actual job, that they were doing basically the same thing. It's just one was indoor and one was outdoor. But there was a 23% difference in the wage of the gardener who tended to be male. So when we talk about equality, we're not only talking about equality, we're talking about equity as well as we move forward with the next generation. So you now start to analyze the jobs based on this structure, and not just because that they have been traditionally been held by women or held by men. Your next question was, thank you. What do you consider as the greatest challenge of gender equality in your country and in the world? I think the greatest challenge has been to get people to understand what it is and not feel threatened. And it has to do with the power dynamic. Nobody really wants to give up power willingly. So it always has to be a fight and a struggle. Whereas if we are able to recognize that, you know, we can all benefit when we apply a gender equality, we work towards gender equality, we work towards gender equity, then as a society, when as a world, that we can understand that if we do this thing well, we can all benefit from it. And it's not taking power from George and giving it to Jean. It is power given to each and everyone based on our own capacities and our capabilities. If we can get people to understand that, that would be the greatest thing. But it is hard because people feel as if, men feel as if you are robbing them of their power, and some women feel that they're going to do it to men. Because that's accepted. There's some women that feel that they're doing to men, I'm going to get back at this man. It's not that. It is, how do we work together as a people, recognizing our differences and learn to realize that when we come together collectively, that the society itself benefits, the family, the children, the society, the country, it all benefits, and that's the biggest challenge. What's the other one?
Nino has some question. Nino can ask question.
Sorry?
Yes. Hello, Nino.
Yes, I'm not understanding you. What do you say?
Nino has some question to you.
Yeah, I answered Nina's question, I think. Didn't I not, Nina?
Yes, Nino can speak. Okay, I will open her microphone.
Under Nino, Rajeshwar Devkota sir has questions.
Hello. So Nalita already answered my question. Thank you very much. Totally agree, and nice to meet you once again.
Nice to meet you too, Ken. Yes.
Now we have questions.
Yeah. There's a question here. There's a question here about how the how families, how the elderly are cared for. I think this was a question. I think it's gone down. A question about the elderly care as well.
Yeah.
We have a fairly good health system, and I should have said this earlier when I was talking about Barbados in itself. We have universal access to medical care. And so when a person reaches the age of 65, in some instances, and 67 in others, they have access to a number of things. They have access to total free care. Every aspect of their care can be provided free. If they choose not to use it, then there's the private system, but there's access to it. Of course, when you have money, you can pay, you get access faster. But it is still there. We have a number of facilities across the country that provide care for the elderly, and it's full care, just full care, health care, nutritional care, health, mental care, total care that's available. Again, there are private facilities that are available, and that are people who have good pension plans and so on could have access to using the care homes. But traditionally, we have always kept the elderly at home unless there is a need for care. We've always kept the elderly at home. And so a large number of our families still have grandmothers, have three generations within the house. And they get a pension, whether they have worked or not, they get a pension from government because government accepts that even if you were a housewife, that you would have been making a contribution to the development of the country, and so that they have access to a non-contributory pension that they can still eat, not just barely eat. Unfortunately, it's not as big as it should be, but it's still an income that they have that they can make some determinations about what they need and so on. Food in Barbados is very expensive. Hospital care is free for anyone. Even if you're a visitor, you can get access to hospital care. Depending on your immigration status, however, you have to pay for some aspects of it. But there's some countries that have a relationship within the region. There's some countries that have a relationship with England as well. That if people come to Barbados and need to be treated, that they're treated free of cost. And when I had my heart attack in England, I went to an English hospital and I was treated, given free access to medication. So it has to do with the treaties and the arrangements, the actual arrangements that you might have in terms of visitor and so on. The discrimination in retired time, especially in the COVID-19 period, I think the main thing it depends on how you look at it. The majority of people who are described as being at high risk are people who are elderly. And so because they're high elderly, they have to accept a number of restrictions and so on. They might not be able to see their families. Families might not visit them if they're in a public home care for the elderly or private home care for that matter. And so you have those kind of things. But I would say that I wouldn't say that there is a lot of gender discrimination in retired time. I think it's how you deal with it, how you prepare yourself for it. That would be a challenge to you, whether you're a man or a woman. But in terms of the state providing care, there's no discrimination at all. You have access to the homes, you have access to hospital care, you have access to the polyclinics for medication and regular checkups and so on. So there's really no discrimination, I think, in that period of time. The 43% of women that are single, like I said, these are women, to a large extent, these are women who have made decisions not to marry. There's some of them who have had failed relationships and decided not to get into a marriage. And therefore, there's some women who have been working and they're working independently on high salaries, and they feel that they have a notion of independence that says to them, I can do this without a man. And you have that level of people as well. But I think that the majority, there's a high level of poverty within that 43% of households that are headed by single women. There are households that are headed as well by single men, but they don't have as high a level of poverty in that category as well. I must be honest with you in terms of because you're asking about the care of the elderly people. There was a time, some time ago, where we had a situation where people were getting tired looking after their elderly and caring for their elderly sick. And they were taking them to the hospital and they would register them in for care and they were leaving them. They could not go back. get them. So the state, because it has a responsibility for all of its citizens, maintain these people within the hospitals. They stayed in the hospitals, but then it recognized that it was costly to do so because the hospital bed is more expensive than a home bed at a nursing care bed. And so that these women and men were transported then to care in homes that were held or owned by, managed by the government. So they had aspects of geriatric care for them that was not as expensive as maintaining a hospital bed. So they do have geriatric hospitals in the country, and most people who want them can have access to them. And the state says that the COVID period, I'll tell you, we only last week, I think, or maybe it's this week because time fails me sometimes, we have had no deaths among the elderly that were in care. No deaths during this COVID period. And the reason for that is that very early, the state instituted protocols that said you cannot visit a old person's home. There was no visitors allowed at all. They were given care. You might be able to bring or send something for them if you wanted to, but you were not allowed in. And that continued just until, I would say, maybe a month or so ago. But we've had no deaths of people in the hospitals or the clinics that were due to COVID at all. I'm just looking at some more.
कुन्दा म्याडम तपाईले
Go
सोध्दिनु
ahead.
भयो सोध्नु नि कुन्दा म्याडमले सोध्नु तपाईको क्वेशन राख्दिनु अनम्युट गरे मैले अनम्युट तपाईले गर्नु त हुन्छ होला अनम्युट गर्नु बाय बाय बोल्नु
There's a question. There's one here from Bram, Nepal. Yeah, where is Ram, Nepal? Oh, his face is gone. Could you please share your experiences on challenges of in building societies free of gender discrimination? As I tried to explain earlier, it is a rewarding experience when you see the changes that you're working for, even although they're too gradual and they're too incremental. But the thing is to be honest and true to the people who you serve. And what you're trying to do is you really have to convince women that you're not trying to train them to take over the world. And you have to try to train men to understand that you're not trying to tell them that they don't have access, that they have to yield their power either. Or they yield, I shouldn't say power, yield their masculinity, because masculinity and power are two different things. So that's been the challenges in terms of helping people to understand the consequences of discrimination as well. Because sometimes we see discrimination as something that is just how you feel about somebody. But it's not, discrimination is not how you feel about somebody, it's your action. What is the action that you have taken that impacts on somebody's life? So when you see discrimination, it's not just as a feeling, I can discriminate because I don't like somebody. That's another description of another, I don't know, something else. Discrimination is when you take from somebody, you rob somebody of their right to be able to perform and to work as a human being with equal access, with your rights, human rights, and with their own personal power to achieve their best at their own level. And that's been hard because you just need to say the word gender and men get real upset, and they seem to think, oh, you men want to take over the world. We don't. We just want to say that our mothers work hard, our grandmothers work hard. We're standing on their shoulders because of what they have done to ensure that we have had education, that we have health care, that we can be members of government. We're standing on their shoulders, and we're just saying we need to go further, because every child in the future need not have the same struggle that we have. Like, we don't have the same struggle that our grandparents have. And they shouldn't have the same struggle that we have. They should be able to be moving gradually along with everybody else to have access to the resources of the state. And I keep saying that the state, because the state is the institution that has the greatest power to discriminate. Because when the state starts to change its laws, when the state starts to implement policies that are embracing and are fair, then the rest of the society will follow, because they will have no other option, because if you're breaking the law, So that has been a major challenge. And then, of course, is the personal abuse. You cannot do this work without the personal abuse. And I cannot tell you the amount of times I have cried. I can't tell you the amount of times that I have said I would not do this anymore. I can't tell you the amount of times that I wish I hadn't started, because the abuse is terrible. And it's not, it don't only come from men. Don't think it only comes from men. Huh? It also comes from women who see you as disrupting their lives, their good old lives. What you keep making all this talk for, you know? I'm living good. What's wrong with you? So you get that. And I think that one of the hardest things was when I used to do a television program. And when I got home, I used to talk like I'm talking now about gender issues and relate them to every aspect of people's lives and so on. And when I got home, my son was crying. And he said, "Mommy, why people hate you so much?" He was like maybe in a 7 or 8 years old, something like that. "Mommy, why people hate you so much?" And I couldn't understand. I said, "How are you talking about?" Someone had called my home. By the time I left the station, about this is not small. It just says 166 square miles. So, you know, it's not far to get from any one place to the other. By the time I got home, someone had called my home. My son had answered the phone. And someone was cursing me to my son. And he was too young to understand what it was all about. But all he was just crying, why, Mommy, why people hate you so? So that I think that has been the worst part, because that had that. I think it's been the worst and the best part, because it could push you. It pushed you to do more, to stand firm, because you say, this is what I believe in. But the consequences of the pain and the harassment, sometimes getting your soul so much you don't even realize that when you yourself are mentally damaged, and when you need to pull back, because if you go any further, you're going to fall off the cliff or something like that. So that has been a main challenge for me. But I've had a good life. I'm still having one. But in terms of the gender work, it has been thank you. It has been fantastic. Thank you very much. It has been fantastic, the work, and to see the changes, and to know that at the end of the day, you're not doing harm, you're doing good. And the thing is to do good. If you can do good and help people to understand how they themselves can do good, it's worth it. It really is worth it.
Kunda madam, चालू सोध्नुस् त हुन्छ तपाईं सोध्नुस्.
Yeah, Kunda madam.
Yes.
Hi.
Hi. Greetings from Nepal. Congratulations, Nalita Gajadhar, for your excellent and touchy presentation. Actually, I am a widow, and I know so many of your sign language by your eyes. That's why I am so overwhelmed. But I want to ask you a question. I am struggling since 27 years when I became a widow, and I am also struggling for the rights of the widows of Nepal. But I know, no, not only in Nepal, it's all over the world. We are the women, and when we became single as a widow, the situation is more worse than a woman. And as you have already taken in your presentation, and so many experiences you mentioned, are there any new that government policies that are doing the right for the widows, or any compensations or any facilities for the widows, as they also want to fight with the same human rights perspective than others, and not for the begging as a part of widows and as a part of women, as a part of discriminated society? So is there any special program in your country? I just want to know.
There, like I said, there are pensions for widows. Huh?
Yeah.
Widows in most instances can have access to their I think in government, if they're working, they can have access to their men's pensions. I am not sure. I'll have to check that out for you, but I do know that I have not heard, it's not been an issue that we have been paid attention to, because it's not been identified as a challenge. What was identified as a challenge, and we had to change our Family Law Act, was the fact that because we had households with visiting relationships, the Family Law Act had only at one time recognized marriage. So that only in a married situation were women entitled to any access to a man's income. You have the Family Law Act that said if you were the wife of a husband, that you were entitled to half of his property, or an appropriate amount depending on the judge. So as a widow, you didn't lose. If your husband had $10, you didn't lose it. The judge would make a determination to say, well, if there's, okay, you were with that man for how many years? He's got $10. Based on your contribution to the development of that wealth, what percentage of that are you entitled to? In some instances, it was half. In some instances, because the unions might have been of short of time in terms of the income that was left, it would be determined in terms of what is appropriate to the widow. What was a challenge for us was that you had a number of women who were not married. But the Family Law Act did not cover them. So a woman could have been living in a house with a man for 30 years, for 40 years, and don't believe me, that's sometimes their experience, because they just don't want to be married. And they would have had children, they would raise, they would have invested in their home together and build a home together and so on. But then at his death, someone, his family, his sister, somebody, my brother might turn up and say, well, look, this is my brother's property. And that person would have no access to that income that they would have developed. What our Family Law Act did was to say, no, we recognize, based on our culture, we recognize people who are living in a situation, a family situation other than marriage. So it gave the woman who was living in that household, or man, because it worked both ways, other than marriage, at the death of that person had entitlement to have, or what is the appropriate description or definition or allocation for the income, so that person would not left stranded and put out on the street, that they didn't have access. Because before, it used to happen. Somebody would just turn up and say, no, she ain't your wife, I want this. And she wasn't the wife. But the law did not protect that person. So now the law does protect that person. And if it protects that person, it will also be protecting widows at the same level, so that widows will have access to whatever allocation is determined by the state. If there's no challenge, it will be half of the estate, and then the other half would go to the children the children of the family. So they're not left stranded, and that's it. But then the lawyers, I'm not sure how many of you here are lawyers. You had to be in a situation to be able to make that claim if you were in a union for not less than 5 years. So then what the lawyers would do, would advise the guy, fall out with the woman, break up, go for 6 months or so, then move back. So you then starting the 5 years all over again. And that was a tactic that was used basically to help people, to stop people from fulfilling their responsibility to their spouse, to their partner. But yeah, the state does recognize the widows in that aspect of ownership and distribution of wealth. Very, very, very much so. And the legislation that the person who led that legislation was Sir Henry Ford, a man who at the time he was leading in government, leader in the opposition party. And of course, the men in the country were so angry that he then couldn't go further than that. They ended up giving up his position as leader of the opposition and giving it to yielding it to someone else, because he would never be elected as a leader, because men felt that he had been disloyal to them, and without recognizing that he was doing good for their sisters and their mothers and their aunts, you know. But yeah, I think we're good to our widows.
Mitra sir, हजुरको अनम्युट गरेर भन्नुस्. Hello, Mitra sir.
Hello. Wait, what? Hello.
Hello, Park.
Yeah, am I reaching to you? Yeah. Thank you. Your comprehensive presentation. Hello.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I don't have that much questions. I don't want to bother you. Nowadays, it is very easy to get the information if you go to the Google or YouTube anywhere. But live interaction is at more value. That's why it is. Yeah, your comprehensive presentation, we got a lot of information. And I have some about the idea of Barbados, about your country, that you are very good in disaster management, your government and local people also very knowledgeable about the disaster management. I know it, and Barbados is a country of birthplace of Rome. Yeah. And still, I think Bangladeshi and Indian people, they don't need a visa, to visit your country. How about the Nepal? Do we have this privilege or not?
Just repeat the last part about visiting.
Yeah, Bangladeshi and Indian people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. They don't need the visa. They can direct visit to your country. They have this privilege.
So Bernard, help me with the question, please. I'm not understanding.
He asked that Indian and Bangladeshi people do not need visa to come to your country. And what about Nepal? Do you need visa to come to your country for Nepali people?
I think this is where we don't have embassy. In those countries, we can have on-arrival visa. That is the system normally. If there is no embassy in Nepal, then normally we can have on-arrival visa. If no. We have in the Google, we can search that where we don't need visa. Maybe in Barbados also the same thing applies.
Okay, there are certain countries that don't need a visa, and I'm thinking that India, Pakistan, I do not think that they might need visas. But what they do have in Barbados, they have honorary consuls. And like you were saying, they have honorary consuls, and so that they can make application here. But I do not think that they need visas for Barbados. But that is something that I could check too, because I would love you guys to come. I could check to see if they do need visas.
We can We can
But
find
we
it
have
out.
we have so many families that are here, because outside of the Negro population or the Black population, the highest number is the Asian population. And they have been building and they have been growing. They have been growing rapidly in the region, and they are going through some tremendous changes. You're seeing a number of females who are now becoming doctors and lawyers themselves. There is a group of women. They basically been agitating for women's rights and women's access to their church. What's it called? Well, what is equivalent to the church? I'm sorry. And so on. So it's vibrant. What's happening in the region, and not just in Barbados, in the region. It's truly vibrant. And it would be interesting for you or people like you who are in positions of power to see what a world can be like with these changes, where men and women can still exist, where family relationships can still exist, but where when it comes to the state seeing people, they don't just see one, they see two. And when the state starts to see two, then you see that, wow, it really is a good world. But some of my best friends, I grew up in a community where they had a large number of Muslim women, and some of them are still my best friends. We live next door. We live in the same community, and we continue to be best friends up to now. And they're the ones who they are largely importing, bringing in husbands and wives, because out of a small community, you want to widen it. So you're getting a large number of men and women coming in to marry the girls, or for the girls to marry the guys. And there's no discrimination. There's no anger. They don't feel that they need to hide themselves and to be protected by the state, because nobody, how they work and how the society, Barbados society works, where you tend to just welcome. We just welcome everybody, you're all part of the whole process. And so you're seeing that growing, that growing as well. But I don't know about the visa thing, but I could find out for you with no problem.